Good afternoon and welcome to the podcast series Unshakable Strength, Empowering Black Women, sponsored by the Empower Project. The Empower Project is a partnership between Howard University and Health HIV, sponsored by the PACE grant from Gilead Sciences. The Girlfriends Podcast is a podcast dedicated to addressing the unshakable strength shown and the unique health challenges faced by Black women and girls, particularly in the context of HIV prevention. We will explore important topics such as sexual health, mental well-being, access to healthcare, and strategies for HIV prevention tailored to the needs of Black women and girls. We invite you to listen to our other episodes that explore important topics like Prepared and Empowered or Growing Strong, Early HIV Interventions for Young Girls, and so many more that are already available for you. Today's episode, Fighting for Justice, the hidden toll of HIV laws on Black women. This episode unpacks the harsh reality of HIV criminalization and how outdated laws disproportionately harm Black women. These laws, rooted in stigma, not science, undermine public health efforts by discouraging testing, deterring disclosure, and increasing fear around diagnosis. From unjust prosecutions to emotional trauma, we explore how these policies fuel misinformation and widen health disparities. Today, I have the honor of introducing my guest, Ms. Kamaria Lafrey. Living with Black Girl Magic, HIV, and chronic optimism, Kamaria Lafrey serves nationally as co-executive director with the Zero Project. Working to decriminalize HIV, she supports advocates in leading her state coalition on reform efforts, and in both roles, offers strategic planning and community mobilization training to state leaders living with HIV to change their criminalization laws. Good afternoon, Kamaria. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to see you.
Same here, same here. So let's start off with just a quick, as simple as you can. What is HIV criminalization?
Yeah. So it's a very broad issue, but in simple terms, it is a set of laws that are used to penalize people living with HIV solely based on their HIV status and whether or not they can prove disclosure.
Wow, that's some serious stuff. So let's just dive right in. So, what are the often unseen emotional and mental health effects of HIV criminalization on people living with HIV? And how do those impacts ripple through families and communities?
I really love this question because I often talk about what I consider the threat of criminalization. So the emotional and mental health effects are, like, in my mind, multi-tiered. So you have, like, folks, women living with HIV, when it comes to, like, dating and disclosure, navigating that path of, like, doing it safely. There are cases where people have done what they're supposed to do based off whatever their public health law is in their state and disclose their status prior to engaging in sex to their partners, only to face violence or um, death, to be perfectly honest. So there's the fear of, like, if I do what I'm supposed to do, am I going to live to continue um, to be in this relationship or to be in my, thrive in my life? So you have that. You have folks who have experienced criminalization as far as being sentenced and put in prison. And the toll on that isn't just done when the judge hits his gavel or their gavel and sentences the person. It goes from the cell to the community and to the cellular makeup of the family. Whether they're close with their family or not, it still impacts them. I was just talking with a group of women yesterday um, about how in the state that they're from, uh, the one of the penalties for criminalization was to be on the sex offender registry upon release from their sentence, and that meant, as mothers, they had to be very, very careful about where they lived, activities their child could be in, keeping custody of their children. not facing threats around losing their child, wanting to continue to have other children, and having to make all those choices based off of a really aggressive penalty that really does not impact public health when it comes to HIV. Like, these laws don't help reduce HIV transmissions. And I don't want to get off on a tangent there, but there are so many layers of trauma that people experiencing criminalization, the threat of criminalization, or just living with HIV, experience that lead to like shame and isolation. And like I said before, it doesn't end with just the individual. It goes well into their family. It impacts them mentally, financially, um, and a lot of people aren't discussing this. And it's something that I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to shed some light on.
Wow, that's man, when you said the word ripple, I didn't realize the ripple was so vast. That is amazing to me. And wow, what an impact. Something as simple as just a law that says you have to disclose, and the way that it affects families and communities, that's big. So then what, and I'm going to use the word bold here, what bold community rooted actions must we take now to dismantle these laws and really protect Black women's freedom, dignity, and their right to thrive?
Yeah, protecting Black women. That is, it sounds good. And I feel like a broken record. I feel like I say this a lot, but as a society, wanting to protect Black women, Black and brown women, to be honest, seems like something that, makes people feel good, in theory. But since protecting us to me is about trusting us, it's about listening to us, it's about resourcing the strategies and tactics that we bring as solutions, to issues that we face that look different from the rest of the world. And I feel that it also, deeply ties into like we have to stop criminalizing people for surviving. And this is beyond HIV. Like, we have to stop criminalizing bodies. All of our bodies are different. And so some ways I would think about that around being like bold or community rooted. One is establishing, like, as an individual, what intersectionalities you actually sit at, because I think understanding the intersectionalities that we each individually have help us identify others, and also how those intersectionalities sometimes um, operate as a privilege for some, and then in some other spaces operate as a barrier. So for myself, as a Black cisgendered straight woman, I know that I sit at the intersectionality between race and gender as a Black woman. And you're always going to see those two things first. And depending on what setting I'm in, determines, like, in my healthcare, getting an accurate diagnosis, or even how I'm treated with just getting a follow up appointment. How I sound on the phone isn't how I show up in person, depending on the individual's understanding of culture and tone and dialect and things of that nature. And so sometimes I get treated lovely on the phone, and then when I show up in person, it's a completely different situation, which is very frustrating. And I feel like not having this individual understanding of our intersectionalities, keeps us from embracing other people's identities and how they want to show up. And I think we utilize that, um, at my organization, a lot. We have these conversations a lot. So that individual understanding, I think, is the first thing that you have to do. And when thinking of criminalization and prevention or treatment together, those are two intersections of systems that are disproportionately marginalized and represented by Black women and Black folks. And so some of the ways I think is, like I said earlier, investing in not just a one-time investment, but like sustaining movement spaces that are being led by Black women, um, and not just within HIV, but also your reproductive justice spaces, or your I don't know how to phrase it, but like folks who work grassroots in supporting parents with bailout. Like there's a program in some places where you, like Mother's Day, they raise funds for bailout programs. That's another way to kind of lean in. I would love to see that amplified in our society of how we support folks, because when we really look at the carceral system, when you really are honest about this country and the systems that are in place, the response to a person being accused of not being able to prove their disclosure around HIV with their sexual partner being a prison sentence makes no sense. Having a lot of our responses of locking someone in prison are not the appropriate response to what the person allegedly or did do. There needs to be more trauma informed care around supporting people in their mental health, especially around disclosure. Disclosure is incredibly difficult, aside from being dangerous. It's just really hard to reveal that because of stigma. Um, and if we took the time to amplify the spaces where Black women are being innovative leaders, I feel like we'd be a lot more further in our movement and changing laws and mobilizing more strategically, without over sophisticating. Because I feel like we over sophisticate and then we never actually get the thing done. We're just constantly making the plans look pretty, but also being intentional about encompassing discussions around approaches that challenge stigma, um, but also like help build unique campaigns and sustain those. I've been a part of a few campaigns that I didn't understand why they only lived for 1 year, because they were really, really impactful and they didn't get it. I don't think they got a helpful chance to like live beyond the region that I was in. So I think investing in spaces and what's working that's not broken, there's no need to end it, especially around PEP and PrEP. For Black women, there's so many spaces where I talk about PEP and PrEP specifically, and people are like, "No, I don't know what that is. I didn't know that was for me." I've even been asked if PrEP was available at before my diagnosis, would I have taken it? And I said, based on the education I was receiving at that time, no, because I wouldn't have. We're doing the same thing now that we were doing 30 years ago when it comes to targeting priority populations and things of that nature. Like wherever the funding trend goes, that's where the attention goes, and other folks get fall in the cracks. So back to your question. I don't want to keep naming the problems around community rooted actions. One thing I thrive off of is creating spaces for healing and accountability. So that ties into the trauma informed care. And that may not be such a bold thing to do, but I think it's something that needs to be done with more intention. I think the things that we're doing with the tools that we have are enough. Let me restate that. I think the tools that we have are enough. I think we're not putting enough intention and meaningfulness into building relationships with people in community for those tools to be effective. Um, I feel like we are, as a society, as a movement, are often distracted by all the things. And with this year, it makes complete sense. But historically, I feel like we've gotten distracted and comfortable with making progress and forgetting to go back to other spaces where folks have fallen in the cracks. And I think making this more of instead of a linear approach, more of a cyclical approach of going back and making sure like, okay, we did this first round for X amount of years. Who's still not at the table? Who's still not accessing treatment? Who's still not in care? Let's go back and do that a few times until you realize that you have everything in place without changing the systems that you've already established that are working for the others that you were able to help. I hope that makes sense of what I'm saying because I can see it in my head, and I'll be happy to write this out in a think tank with someone. Yeah, so those are just some ways. I think it all starts with the individual, and that's why I focus mostly on that in my response. It starts with our individual assessments, whether you're living with HIV or not, of understanding what is your why. Why are you coming to this space? What's keeping you? And if you can't identify your why anymore, I give you permission to find something else to do, to be perfectly honest. Because often if you're holding a space out of obligation or tradition or legacy, sometimes that's not helpful. Sometimes you have to move to create space for others. And I think that's, again, not so much bold. It's an individual choice, but I think if more of us took the time to do that, we would be a lot further than we are now. That was a really long answer to your question.
No. But I appreciate it because you speak with sincerity and you speak with passion. And, I've had the honor and the privilege of knowing you for a long time. I count you among my very small number of friends. And I have only known you in an advocate space. I've only known you to be Kamaria, the advocate, the one who fights for the voiceless. I love that. And I've heard you use the term before because, you're one of the most humble high level leaders that I know. You will speak in a room of thousands for a conference the same way that you speak in a room of two people who just you believe need to hear this information. So I know your heart. And I've heard you use the term before, full liberation for people living with HIV. And so my question is, why is community led advocacy so important to ending HIV criminalization? And how do we build collective power to move beyond just reform, really towards that full liberation for people living with HIV?
First, thank you. Got me a little emotional. Um, I appreciate your words and for how you see me as a leader, and I just have to add to your sentiments around, this isn't just a job. It I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for my diagnosis, to be perfectly honest, and I'm grateful for it. I'm so sorry because I'm just, yeah. Um, Criminalization, however, is not something that I've ever personally faced, but so many people that I love have. And so I often get asked, like, why are you speaking up for this if it's not even something that's a lived experience of yours? I'm like, because it could be. It could easily be. There's no statute of limitations. There's no limit to how far people can go when they're experiencing their own pain and trauma. Um, where people will bleed on you because of wounds that they have. So it's very personal for me. I don't believe in waiting for something to happen to me to speak on it. But when you talk about building collective power, again, we must invest in the leadership of folks who are closest to the problem. And so when it comes to criminalization, Black and Brown people living with HIV, women, trans, non binary folks are the most targeted by the criminal legal system in general. Um, a lot of states have been able to work with some folks that do research to establish what that looks like in their state. But anyway, building collective power. Oh, I love that phrase of collective power because a lot of people think about getting power for themselves, like individually. And there's a way to do that, like reclaiming your power and taking back the narrative of your own life. Myself, for example, I feel like I operate in power by not letting my local town spread gossip about me when they found out that I was living with HIV, and continually targeting that throughout my life. um, what makes that collective is bringing like-minded people together who feel affirmed and supported and heard, even if their story of what's bringing them to the table for solutions isn't isn't polished or shiny or makes people feel good. There are some stories out there that are gritty. People are living real, full lives. And I recognize sometimes in storytelling with building power that if folks feel like they can't do anything to help that one individual, then that story suddenly is either highly tokenized or it gets pushed away. I'm like, oh, that's too much. We don't want to deal with that. And I think we have to start stepping away from that. Um, and what that looks like is just, again, it's an individual thing. I really feel like we all need to have a come to Jesus meeting with ourselves. Um, but also on a systemic level, on an organizational movement level, funding grassroots networks, like local state coalitions, because often that's all volunteer spaces, and people are working full-time jobs and navigating being a human in America. So having those coalitions funded so that folks can implement programs and do more outreach and better connect with people is a way to build collective power. Also, for folks who are coming to coalitions specifically on HIV decrim, what I prioritize is people living with HIV are the leaders. So if you have assignments for those coalitions like chair, vice chair, coordinator, whatever, that those spots are held by people living with HIV, but not as a token, not as a prop, but that they are supported by other people in the community that may be able to fill in deficits that the person holding that spot does not have. But I think the champions that are building relationships with legislators and stakeholders and coalitions have to be people living with HIV. And then building collective power also looks like cross movement building. We've got to break our silos. So while I work in HIV decrim, I also recognize that HIV criminalization is a reproductive justice issue. So I have to be at the table with other folks doing reproductive justice work. I also have to be at the table of people doing immigration outreach and support. I also have to be at the table around harm reduction and sex work and so on and so on. But it's not just a one-time pop in because my grant said I had to be here type of thing. It has to be a relational, not transactional, a relational opportunity where at least you have an opportunity to build values alignment. When building collective power, you may not always get along with the people at the table. You may not be friends, and that's totally fine. Um, Community organizing and movement building is about working yourself out of a job. It's not about building friends. It's about putting change that everyone can benefit from. And if you can find values alignment, even outside of like, I don't really care for this person, but you both share values that HIV criminalization shouldn't be a thing, then you can build movement together. And so part of building collective power is recognizing that. And I think liberation requires us to decriminalize not just the laws, but the culture that polices our bodies, and our choices and our futures. And I know some of that stuff can be considered controversial depending on who's listening this particular year. Um, but it's the truth, and it always has been the truth. Building power requires selflessness. It requires you to put your ego to the side and roll your sleeves up and decide that you're going to fight for what's right instead of what feels good, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Everything you have said makes powerful sense. Listen, I don't care. Like you said, I don't have to wait for the problem to touch me for me to get involved in the solution. I love that. I think that is amazing. Thank you so much, Kamaria, for all of the amazing insight you just provided today into this extremely important issue. It's such powerful information. To those listening or watching, thank you for tuning into this episode of our podcast. It's our hope that you found this conversation both engaging and informative. And for me, I really hope you found it inspiring for you to join in some of that community grassroots mobilization to really tackle this issue, whether you're coming at it from a patient care side or a prevention side. It matters. We encourage you to tune in to our upcoming episodes covering topics like exploring faith, sexuality, and empowerment for Black women, as well as intimate partner violence, HIV risk, and the path to empowerment, and so many others that we're preparing just for you. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us reach even more listeners. Until next time, have an amazing day, and thank you for listening.